Malaysia is host to its own lineup of evil spirits, with a myriad of stories that range from slight shadows to full-on deaths from encounters. It houses ritualistic beliefs of black magic and voodoo, curses that could render a person impotent to some that would cause a person to vomit live fish and bleed from every pore on their body. Ghosts such as the Pontianak, an unwed mother that was left to die on her own during childbirth that seeks out males to father her child, or Pochong, an undead that jumps around to find help opening their ties that tie their body up in a white cloth wrap because during burial, the persons present had not undone their wrappings. My encounter was with the Penanggalan. Between the age of 13 and 17, my life consisted of living in a boarding school up in the mountains inside of a jungle. I wish that wasn't true. My 15-year-old self would have wanted that more so than anything. This one story, however, is one that I can't forget, no matter how hard I try. It's seared into my retinas, lodged into my brain so deeply, it haunts me till this day. The trip up to the mountain boarding school consisted of snacks and the obligatory soda to transform the hour-long ride from home into a more bearable state, and those trips were unluckily far and wide apart. Students were allowed only a monthly leave of one weekend only, free to do what they please with it, but Malaysia being a conservative nation on the equator meant that the students would go home with family. No one thought otherwise. No one argued. No one deviated. The weekend had ended, and thus the trip back up. I despised the school, and the trip up the mountain was always arduous. Even with my mother's slow driving, the trip took forever. The tires climbed and squealed up the mountain road ever so slowly. The growing greenery sights crept up eerily and uninviting, pushing my heart deeper into the dark recesses of my soul. I hated this trip, every single time. We approached the school gates as it suddenly appears after a bend. The school is hard to see from afar. Camouflaged by the thick jungle surround its perimeter, excluding one side of the large trapezoid. The school is the direct definition of a school in the middle of nowhere. The guard at the gate sits lazily and waves anyone in. They are there not to prevent entrances, but to stop escapees. My mother continued driving after the brief stop. It didn't take long to reach the dormitory quarter from the front gate. The school grounds worked primarily on walking terms. A student could walk from the dorms to the cafeteria in under 5 minutes, and that's more than half of the school covered. One perk we have deceived ourselves to believe was that we were the pioneers of the school. First students to break the silence of a freshly built traditional open-style secondary education facility. The windows were glass slats, hardly locked, easily opened. The doors, though equipped with locks, were always open. 3 stories of identically designed classes and a 400-yard-long building with open connected roof balconies was what we identified as the school building, with multiples of the building connected by roof corridors. The only difference the classes had with the dorms was that it was missing an iron gate and a perimeter fence. My friends would often joke that the only difference between the school and a prison is that we're paying to stay here. We even joked more that prisoners possibly even received larger lockers and springier beds. Our lockers couldn't even fit a grown man, even if he rolled up. But that's where we called home away from home. A dorm room that housed at least 20 students sleeping on squeaky bunk beds, in a 400-foot-long 3-story building holding 4 dorms on each level. A few hundred male students in very cramped living quarters, vying to be the elites of the country someday. And we had to stay here for a majority of a month for 4 years. My mother always says it pained her to send me here, to keep me away from home, from the family. My father believed it was a sacrifice worth the outcome. It's the road to greater beginnings. A sardine can dorm with communal cold showers, barely working plumbing, and iron bars fitted onto the windows and front entrance of the dorm quarters. Greater beginnings. My mother began her usual speech of missing me throughout the month until the next time I'm able to leave as we pass the front gate towards the dorm quarters, passing the courts that tripled up from many different sports in the field that was meant for soccer and rugby and golf and any other sport that required field use, given that it wasn't raining. If it was, then the less it was used. We reached the dorm building, parked, had our ritual hugs and goodbyes, and I made my way up through the iron gates and up the stairs towards my second-story dormitory where I slept close to the room entrance, which I must emphasize is never closed. My friends greet me with their usual enthusiasm and cheer, and I return it with the same fake level of excitement. A ritual that all growing dormitory adolescents must repeat on a monthly basis should they envision themselves to grow up into an adult. I am desensitized to it. I repeat the ritual. We are excited to be in this school. We are the brighter future. Our teachers deem it so, brighter than others, in cramped spaces. The day ended instantly after that sluggish creep up the mountain. Everyone was back, those that left. Everyone slept after sharing their weekend escapades of freedom, and the next day started, a school day. Another minutely, exhaustively scheduled day prepared for the students to honor. The punishment of not honoring the schedule included trips to bathroom duties, excluded supper, or even extra studying time known as prep, and the teachers were more than happy to catch any dishonorable students. Classes began at 7:30 a.m., and everyone wakes up at 5 a.m. to get ready. Everyone finishes at 1:30 p.m., but that's hardly to say I look forward to that time. After an hour break, the schedule deemed that the students required more study in the form of another 2 hours of self-study. I look forward to those times, partly because the day is half done, and partly because that meant I finally had 2 hours and a whole day of pre-configured sloshing about in a schedule that is meant for robots to myself. It meant I could use those 2 hours however I see fit. They were my 2 hours, not to be tampered with by anyone or anything. 2 hours where I could let my soul breathe a little more, let my mind rest and wander, and let my body not be made to walk around on grounds that I prefer not to be in. It meant I had 2 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Come the hour of 7 p.m., all the students congregated into the dining hall. It was separate from the cafeteria as the school had the obligation to feed the students during dinner time. The hour after that, the schedule yet again deemed a 2-hour self-study session in the same classrooms that was guest to all the sessions of biology, English, math, and the whole slate of educational materials present to make us the best of the best. Afterwards, we were made to return to the dorms, which at 11 p.m. the iron gates would be slammed shut and locked from the outside, with one teacher sleeping in the dorms in their own designated room should there be a possible runaway or attempted suicide. No one has been successful. Yet. The incident that marred me forever, though, happened in the middle of the week, either a Wednesday or a Thursday. It had been a particularly long day, longer than usual, as exams were coming soon and everyone had to excel or else they would be held accountable for lowering the national ranking of the school being lowered. We returned to our dorms at the usual time, crashed into our beds, and called it a night. My friends were chatting in the darkness, me on the top bunk, him on the one next to mine, quietly as to not rouse the other 18 dorm mates as they attempted to sleep after the curfew was set. My friend had mentioned how the night seemed chillier than usual, which was an oddity given that Malaysia is always warm year-round. We mentioned that maybe we should close our windows and doors for once as the wind was slightly picking up, but we couldn't be bothered. Pulling our rather thin blankets tighter, we concluded that it would rain tomorrow, wished each other a good night, and proceeded to sleep. He went out first, snoring into his dreams being the happy-go-lucky fellow he was. It took me slightly longer, but before I knew it, I was out. I don't know what woke me up from my slumber that night. The creepingly chillier air, the exceedingly deep silence, or the head. I was on my side when my eyes slit open slightly, being woken up by the uncomfortable situation. And right there, across the courtyard in front of the dorm opposite ours, was a head, floating effortlessly, looking into the dorm across from ours, its guts protruding out from the base of its neck, hanging there, glistening under the moonlight. Horrifyingly disgusting. A Penangalan. I laid there unmoving from shock and fear. How could I? The sight of the beast, a beast I had scoffed at its existence, seared into my brain. Every agonizing, frightful detail. A Penongalon, a creature that appears at night in the form of a floating head, its guts and innards dangling in blood, throbbing and moving as though still functioning, in search of blood. The head began rotating from its current line of sight to face the other way. I closed my eyes tight and feigned sleeping. No fool would fall for that, now that I recollect. The shock and fear had me shaking so hard the bed began to creak. How could no one have woken up? I feigned sleeping still. It felt like hours of feigning. I couldn't sleep, not with knowing that the thing was out there, floating from dorm room to dorm room, peeking through the window of every dorm, looking for something, someone to feast on. It was the perfect place. The open-style buildings allowed it to happen easily. That's when my fear exploded. The dorms were all open, including this one. I don't know what came over me, fear for my being or basic stupidity, but I decided to open my eyes slightly to check. Slowly, I opened my left eye, hoping that the beast was gone. Slowly, I opened my left eye, wishing that I was dreaming, that it was an illusion. Slowly, I opened my left eye, seeing a dangling head looking at me, and it smiled its bloody smile. I woke up the next day in the school's infirmary. It seemed that I was carried there by my dorm mates after they woke up hearing our teachers screaming incantations loudly. They found me lying cold and pale, as if dead, breathing shallow breaths, my heartbeat beating irregularly. The teacher that was on watch that night luckily was also a religious person who knew incantations and readings to ward off spirits. He had stayed the night with me in the infirmary after I received sedation to relax my body. He released me as it seemed that I had woken up and seemed in good health, and I returned to my dorm to rest, and receiving a break from school for a day under health conditions. It seemed that the teacher knew and saw what was about to happen and came at the right time. However, for some reason, no one else in the dorm saw the thing other than the teacher, and no traces of blood or liquids were to be found around the corridors. My roommates till this day wonder what had happened to me that caused such a reaction. The cover story was that of a bee sting, as the real story would incite fear and undue panic in the school. Secretly, religious incantation barriers were put around the dorms to prevent any further issues after that incident. However, stories of a floating, twinkling thing around the field at night afterwards appeared from the girls' dormitory, as their building was located adjacent to the field. Little did they know what it was, floating silently looking for a feast, its guts twinkling under the moonlight, smiling with a bloody mouth.
I'm not just some crazy girl. You'll believe me if you just take a moment to see the way I saw it. I know you will, just listen. It started when I was in Japan. I've been living with a host family for a few months, and my semester abroad was almost over. I had the nerve to believe I've begun to acclimate, that I understood their culture, and that I could call myself one of them. On more than a few nights, gathered around the fire, they told me their superstitions and scary stories. Their myths were very different than the ones I'd grown up with, and I found them fascinating but not scary. They were too different. There was a heavy emphasis on choice. Rather than facing a mindless slasher that simply wanted to kill you, many Japanese horror stories involve entities approaching an unwary victim in a public place and giving them a choice. If the victim answered one way, they would be killed in a horribly specific manner. If the victim took the other choice, then they would be killed in another horribly specific manner. These unwinnable situations made me laugh until the father of my host family explained to me, in quiet tones, the true subtext. It was all about the third option. It was about the innate fear and customs of a very traditional society. The only way to survive was to simply know the acceptable third answer and give that one instead. He squeezed my arm and told me that, as a foreigner, I stood no chance of knowing the third answer. If I saw someone approach me in public, no matter how innocent it seemed, I was to run away before they would give me the fatal choice. I smiled and laughed it off, but this warning made me shiver a few times over my last few days. As a girl alone in another country, I was already on my guard when walking through public spaces, but the towering maze of Tokyo took on a gray, intense tone whenever I thought of what might lurk among the crowds. I stuck to the paths and went through many hidden gardens and parks, and I always looked around very warily. That fear faded, though. I can't tell you exactly. That fear faded, though. I can't tell you why, not exactly. I was young, I thought I was smart, and I was American. Nothing could really hurt me. And besides, I was one of them now, right? I spent months living there like they did. So, on my last day, when the woman began walking intently toward me from the opposite end of a long subway car, I stayed in my seat. She had long black hair, beautiful dark eyes, and a dark green dress that seemed out of place in a crowded car, otherwise filled with gray shirts, dark suits, and white blouses. I saw these details about her, and before I saw the deep scars on her face and hands, as if a maniacal American slasher had brutally carved her up and left her to die some years ago. As she scuffled toward me, the lights flickered once. The boy in the seat next to me shivered and focused worriedly on his portable game. Adults looked away, tense, and teenagers opposite me finally stopped talking and began staring at their shoes. They knew. They knew, and there was nothing any of them could do, or would, do for me. I was a foreigner and a stranger to them. But they listened. Oh, did they listen. I could almost hear them straining their ears to hear whispers over the kneeling of wheels on rails beneath us. Every small step the woman took seemed louder than the one before. Even then, I still didn't believe. I thought it was a prank or someone being strange. I thought the others in the car with me were turning away out of courtesy or disgust at her scars, when I saw a tear fall from the cheek of the boy who stood next to me. When I saw it splatter onto his game screen while he continued to pretend to play. That was when I understood. She stood directly above me, and I raised my eyes to meet hers. Her scars crinkled horribly as she began to give me a seemingly innocent smile. And she asked in a pleasant but whispery voice, "Do you have a sister?" I froze. If I said yes, what would happen? If I said no, what else would happen? When the lights flickered again, and her face moved without moving right down close to mine, I almost panicked and told her the truth. Inches away from me, her smile widened. She turned her head slowly, horribly slowly, until her neck reached a 90-degree angle. On the verge of passing out from fright, I forced myself to start breathing again. Her smile turned into an angry frown. I cowered back against the person behind me, who shrieked. The scarred woman in green began to reach for me, but the car came to a smooth stop. The doors opened, and I dodged around. The doors opened, and I dodged around her and ran out with the crowd. To their credit, none screamed. They simply hurried off to their various destinations while attempting to seem like nothing was wrong. Nobody wanted to draw attention to themselves. Nobody wanted to get noticed by the woman in green, or by polite society. I ran all the way to my host family's house, but nobody was home. It was my last day, and we'd already said our goodbyes, but it still felt odd that they were gone. Still trembling, I took a taxi to the airport, made my flight, and tried to rationalize the encounter right away. The only hint I had that it even happened was the small cut in my upper arm, where she had nearly grabbed me with her horribly long nails. a cut that had, strangely, already begun to heal into a scar. I was talkative and happy on my ride home, and my parents were glad to see me. I didn't tell them about my horrible encounter because it had honestly slipped from my mind. Everything was good, I was safe. We pulled up to the house where I'd grown up, and it looked exactly like I'd remembered. Only a few months had gone by, true, but it felt like a lifetime. Lugging my stuff in alongside my dad, I began to recount some funny memory that had come to mind. When I answered the front door, I turned toward the kitchen and saw her, standing there. Green dress, scars, smile and all. The woman from the subway car, thousands of miles distant, stood waiting for me in my childhood home. She gave me that same eerie smile and lifted a large knife. I screamed and dropped my bags. Startled, my father dropped his too, and my mother rushed in from outside. The woman in the green brought the knife down. She raised it and then brought it down again, chopping vegetables. Mistaking my reaction, my mother began screaming with me, but happily she pulled me forward. It's good to see your sister again, isn't it? Suddenly I was forced into a hug with both my mom and the woman in green, but instead of trying to hurt me, the horrible stranger just smiled. It's good to see you, sis. I pulled away, trembling forcefully. I immediately sensed that something was off, and I'd seen enough movies to keep my cards close to my chest. Mom, what's going on? What do you mean, honey? She asked, smiling happily at us before moving deeper into the kitchen to help cook. The scarred woman in green kept her gaze and neutral smile fixated on me as I moved away from her, around the kitchen island, and toward my mom. Why is she here? Who? Her. I returned the woman's stare. My mother laughed. You've been away way too long, dear. You remember that your sister's graduated and back from college now. You've been away way too long, dear. You remember that your sister's graduated and back from college now. I gulped. Humor me, Mom. Why doesn't she look like us? My father came downstairs, returning from dropping off my bags, and gave me a black look. I thought we were past this. It's not nice to keep harping on your sister for being adopted. Horrified, I took a step back and bumped into the fridge. But how? Oh, I guess I'm just super jet-lagged. Sorry, I was trying to remember. For a birthday present and all. Her birthday, you know? My father sighed. Same day you were born. He stepped out to get more bags from the car. I turned away, mortified. My sister never took her gaze off of me, almost taunting me with her expressionless invasion. As we both stood there, facing off silently, she lifted her knife and brought it down on her own arm, right along one of her scars. She didn't flinch. Instead, I did. Gripping my arm and looking down, I saw the skin slice open, bleed, heal, and fade into a scar in moments. Aghast, I looked at her. I saw the equivalent cut disappearing from her arm. Her smile grew a little wider. I opened my mouth to scream something with fury, but the scarred woman lifted a knife and pointed it at my mother's back. The implication was clear. The best I could do was take the knife from her by offering to cook and insisting that my sister sit down at the table and relax. She did so, apparently willing to play a social game of cat and mouse. As I chopped up vegetables and stared at the scar on my arm, my thoughts raced. This entity had somehow attached itself to my life. Looking around at pictures in the kitchen, I saw her in photographs that I recognized. Family photos that now included her as a child, a teenager, and a woman. Scarred from the outset, I kept my eyes on her as she sat on the table, and she stared right back at me the entire time. Her disfigured smile never once changed. We actually sat down and had dinner as a family, My parents didn't seem to notice that my sister never spoke unless directly addressed. And even then, only with perfect politeness. She ate little and kept her eyes on me always. Halfway throughout dinner, I got angry and slammed my fist on the table. She took a dinner knife and drew it across her cheek. I fought hard not to scream as I felt my face slit open, bleed, and heal. I already knew there would be a scar, but I excused myself to go to the bathroom and look for myself. Once there, it occurred to me that the leech, a leech on my life, time and soul, seemed to be punishing me for rudeness. I remember saying to the mirror, "Alright, bitch, I'll play your game." I just needed time to figure out. Another slice opened up my ear, bled, and quickly healed over into a scar. She heard me from the dining room, or she could hear me no matter what. Walking carefully back into the dining room, I put on my best graces and sat with a smile. I couldn't think about the scars. Were they permanent? Would I live the rest of my life disfigured? Plastic surgery might fix a few, but if this kept going... No, I would just have to be polite and proper until I could figure out how to get rid of her. I volunteered to help clean up dinner and do dishes, and my mother seemed surprised, saying that my time in Japan had done me good. I didn't know what she meant by that, but I managed to get through the evening without any further scars. That night, I tried to whisper to my father in the dark, but he didn't understand what I meant, and I earned another scar on my arm. I slipped downstairs and into her room. My sister sat holding a knife to her arm and grinning wider than I'd ever seen. "What do you want?" I asked her. She held the knife higher on my arm, just above a clear patch of skin where her scars had left her and transferred to me. "Do you have a sister?" Suddenly, remembering that moment of mortal threat in the subway car, I said nothing. She didn't cut herself, but she did wait, always staring, ever staring. I backed out and went to my bedroom where I lay, stressed for hours. I did sleep eventually, but only because jet lag forced me into it. For the next few days, I was filled with terribly costly chess moves. I invited over old friends to see if they recognized her as my sister, and they did. For each of these conversations with confused friends, I earned another scar. The leech knew what I was trying to do, and she disapproved. The worst part was running into an ex-boyfriend and finding out that he didn't remember our relationship. After much pressure, he finally admitted, "I liked your personality, but I didn't ask you out because of your scars. Sorry." I remember screaming and earned another scar for it. Rushing home, I looked at old yearbook pictures. The scars weren't just appearing now. They were appearing back then, too. I'd always had them. The same ex-boyfriend would later remember asking out my sister instead. The leech was draining away my life right before my eyes. What would happen when she ran out of scars and I had them all? I couldn't talk to my parents, I couldn't talk to my friends. I shut myself in my room and spent each day alone to avoid any further social impromptus. I'd been raised American, raised rude, proud, and free, and I kept making mistakes. It was in me to swear, to nettle, and to tease. And the cost was just too high. My host family's father had been right. I was losing because I was from the wrong culture. Had I been a traditional and proper Japanese girl, the leech might never have punished me even once. The leech existed to punish deviants. They fed off outsiders, rebels, and bad children. The leech was part of me now. She only had a few scars left when the idea came to me. She had this huge asinine grin all the time now, and stood in my room while I slept, staring at me, basically daring me to say something rude. She held a knife over me while I slept. Yes, but it wasn't to cut me. It was to cut herself. and that's what gave me the idea. Furious and desperate beyond description, I decided that I wanted my life back at any cost. I'd been thinking of the leech in two ways. I could avoid being rude and live under her threat for the rest of my life, or I could be myself and find out what punishment awaited once all the scars had been inflicted upon me. I feared that second option. I was terrified. When the leech became clear and beautiful, and I became horrid and misshapen. What would she do to me? Would she kill me? Discard of me when I stopped being useful? Would I cease to exist altogether? Would my life become completely hers? I've been so afraid of that second option, it took me until she only had one scar left to remember what my benefactor had said. There was a third option. One unknowable to any but the most socially integrated, and I'd had enough time to see that. For the leech, the social game went both ways. We were not in Japan, we were in America. Here, victims got tough when the end was nigh. She was with me always then. She walked directly behind me, goading me, irritating me, pushing me with her silence and her grin. Oh, that perfect smile on her face, it mocked me. I stood in the kitchen with her and I drew out the same knife that she had been holding when I had first come home, and found her attached to my life and timeline like the horrific leech that she was. I smiled at her, matching her expression, and I brought the knife down before she could react. Not on her, but on myself. I slashed open my arm, the blood splattered across the kitchen island. She gasped and pulled back her hair, hiding her face. I saw her clutch her arm, and I saw a scar appear in the equivalent place where I had slashed myself. I wasn't healing, but I had managed to injure her. I thought long and hard about it. Cutting her would only mean cutting myself, but cutting myself meant cutting her. I slashed again, this time on my face. She screamed, finally. God, I've prayed so long to hear that noise from her. I slashed again on my leg, and then she fell to her knees. My blood splattered across her green dress, soiling it. And I slashed myself again and again and again. I felt faint and I still cut myself, turning my arms, legs, face, and tummy into oozing mincemeat and gobs of flesh. With each strike, she screamed louder and crumpled further. I fell to my knees before her, a wall of pain and ebbing gore. And I smiled at her as her scream reached a crescendo that soared into nothingness. With the last gasp, she shrank and blackened until she became nothing more than a grasping little animal, an actual leech. Without a person to latch onto, she was nothing but a worm. With the last of my strength, I stood up and stomped on her. It was over. I called 911 after that. Of course, and equally as expected, you all think I'm crazy. But you have to listen. She was real. She's gone now. And I'm not going to do this again. I killed her. I know I'll be scarred all over just like she was, but at least I'll get to live. I'll get to swear. I'll get to drink. I'll get to... remorse. For what? Why are you asking me that question? Find the guy on the plane. He'll tell me what I told him. No way he'd forget. You're not hearing me. Find anyone on the subway car that day. In my car, they'll tell you. Why do you keep saying that? Stop asking me that question. She was a leech. She took everything that should have been mine. If she'd just never been adopted, it would have been my life. They would have been my friends, my boyfriends, my prom date. She was always there, always in my goddamn house. Always so much better than me. Always mocking me with that beautiful face. I don't have a sister.